A black man in casual clothes, sitting in business class, immediately raised the flight attendant's suspicions. To her, he looked out of place. To the airline's headquarters, he was board member Robert Hayes, conducting an undercover evaluation of customer service.
Don't forget to subscribe, leave a like, and a comment before we start to learn more about what happened.
Flight 447 from Chicago to Atlanta was running 15 minutes behind schedule, but the crew of SkyLine Airways was determined to make up time once they reached cruising altitude. The Boeing 737 hummed with the familiar sounds of pre-flight preparation. Overhead bins snapping shut, safety demonstrations beginning, and the gentle murmur of passengers settling in for the 2-hour journey. In Seat 3A, business class, Robert Hayes adjusted his reading glasses and opened his tablet to review the quarterly customer satisfaction reports. At 53, Robert looked more like a college professor than a corporate executive, dressed in a comfortable navy sweater, khakis, and well-worn sneakers. His salt and pepper beard was neatly trimmed, and his demeanor was that of someone who preferred comfort over flash. What the other passengers didn't know was that Robert owned a 12% stake in SkyLine Airways and had served on the board of directors for 8 years. He had built his wealth through careful investments in technology startups, but his passion project was helping SkyLine maintain its reputation for exceptional customer service. Today's flight was part of his quarterly routine, traveling incognito to experience the airline through the eyes of an ordinary passenger. Jennifer Walsh had been a flight attendant with SkyLine for 6 years, and she took pride in maintaining the premium atmosphere that business-class passengers expected. At 31, she had worked her way up from economy service and now supervised the business-class cabin on domestic routes. She believed that attention to detail and proper standards were what separated SkyLine from budget carriers. As Jennifer conducted her pre-flight check of the business-class cabin, her eyes lingered on the passenger in 3A. Something seemed off. The man's casual attire, sneakers, khakis, and a sweater that looked like it came from a department store, didn't match the typical business-class demographic. Most passengers in this section wore suits, designer clothes, or at least business casual attire that suggested they belonged in the premium cabin. Moreover, the passengers seemed unusually relaxed for someone who had supposedly paid the premium business class fare. He wasn't checking his phone constantly like most executives, wasn't working on a laptop, and didn't have the air of importance that business class passengers typically projected. To Jennifer, he looked more like someone who had wandered into the wrong section of the plane. Jennifer approached Seat 3A with a professional smile, though her tone carried a subtle edge of suspicion. "Excuse me, sir. Could I see your boarding pass, please?" Robert looked up from his tablet, slightly surprised by the request. Other passengers were settling in around them, but none had been asked to show their boarding passes after already being seated. "Is there a problem?" "I just need to verify that you're in the correct seat," Jennifer replied, her smile becoming more forced. "We've had some issues with passengers accidentally sitting in the wrong section." Robert reached into his jacket pocket and handed over his boarding pass. "Seat 3A, business class," he said, calmly. Jennifer examined the boarding pass carefully, looking for any signs that it might be fraudulent or that the passenger had somehow upgraded himself without authorization. The pass appeared legitimate, but her suspicions weren't entirely satisfied. "And how did you acquire this business class ticket, sir?" Jennifer asked, her voice dropping to a more serious tone. Robert raised an eyebrow at the unusual question. "I purchased it. Is there something specific you're concerned about?" "It's just that we need to ensure all our premium passengers are properly documented," Jennifer said, though she was making up policy on the spot. "Business class seats are quite expensive, and we occasionally have issues with unauthorized upgrades." The conversation was beginning to attract the attention of nearby passengers. A woman in seat 2B glanced over with curiosity, while the man across the aisle paused his phone conversation to listen. "I can assure you that my ticket is legitimate," Robert said, his voice remaining calm, though he was beginning to understand what was happening. "Is there a supervisor I could speak with?" Jennifer's defensive instincts kicked in. "Sir, I am the supervisor for this cabin, and I'm asking you to either provide additional documentation for your business class seat or consider moving to an available seat in economy where you might be more comfortable." The suggestion hit Robert like a slap. After 8 years of board meetings, financial reviews, and strategic planning sessions dedicated to ensuring SkyLine provided excellent service to all passengers, he was being told he might be more comfortable in economy based purely on his appearance. "I'm not moving anywhere," Robert said firmly, though his voice remained controlled. "I have a valid ticket for this seat, and I intend to remain here for the duration of the flight." Jennifer's face flushed with irritation. She wasn't accustomed to passengers challenging her authority, especially passengers who didn't fit her expectations of business-class clientele. "Sir, if you continue to be difficult, I'll have to call security." "Call whoever you need to call," Robert replied, returning his attention to his tablet. "But I'm not moving." The standoff attracted the attention of other crew members. Mark Peterson, the lead flight attendant, noticed the commotion and approached to assess the situation. "What's going on here?" Mark asked quietly. Jennifer stepped aside to speak with him in hushed tones. "The passenger in 3A is refusing to provide proper documentation for his business class seat. I suspect he may have gotten into this section without authorization." Mark glanced at Robert, taking in his casual attire and relaxed demeanor. Based purely on appearance, he could understand Jennifer's concerns. Business class passengers usually dressed differently, carried themselves differently, and projected an air of corporate importance that this passenger seemed to lack. "Did you check his boarding pass?" Mark asked. "Yes, but boarding passes can be transferred or forged," Jennifer replied. "I don't think he belongs here." Mark approached Robert's seat with what he hoped was a diplomatic tone. "Excuse me, sir. We're just trying to sort out a small issue. Would it be possible for you to show us some additional identification that matches your boarding pass?" Robert looked up from his tablet, his patience beginning to wear thin. "Are you asking every passenger in business class for additional identification, or just me?" The question hung in the air uncomfortably. Mark glanced around the cabin, realizing that no other passengers had been subjected to the same scrutiny. "It's just a routine verification," Mark said weakly. "No, it's not routine," Robert replied. "You're singling me out based on how I look, and we both know it." The accusation made Mark uncomfortable because it was undeniably true. He and Jennifer had made assumptions about Robert based on his appearance, and now they were in too deep to back down gracefully. "Sir, we're just trying to ensure the integrity of our premium cabin," Mark said. "If you could just cooperate with the verification process." "I've shown you my boarding pass," Robert interrupted. "I've answered your questions. What exactly do you want me to verify? That a black man in casual clothes can afford to fly business class?" The blunt question made several nearby passengers shift uncomfortably in their seats. Robert's calm delivery made the racial dimension of the situation impossible to ignore. Jennifer bristled at the accusation. "This has nothing to do with race. It's about maintaining standards in our premium cabin." "Standards," Robert repeated quietly. "I see." Mark realized the situation was spiraling beyond his authority to handle. "I think we should let the captain make the final decision on this." "Good idea," Robert said. "Please do that." As Mark headed toward the cockpit, Robert pulled out his phone and sent a quick text message to someone listed in his contacts as CEO office. The message was brief. "Need to talk when you land." Customer service issue on 447. 5 minutes later, Mark returned with a different expression on his face. Behind him walked Captain Patricia Santos, a 20-year veteran pilot whose authority was absolute within the aircraft. Captain Santos was a no-nonsense professional who had seen every type of passenger dispute imaginable. She approached Robert's seat with the measured pace of someone accustomed to resolving conflicts quickly and decisively. "Good afternoon, sir," Captain Santos said. "I understand there's been some confusion about your seating." "No confusion on my part," Robert replied. "I'm sitting in the seat that matches my boarding pass. The confusion seems to be with your cabin crew." Captain Santos glanced at Jennifer and Mark, both of whom looked increasingly uncomfortable. "What specific concern do you have about this passenger's ticket?" Jennifer struggled to articulate her suspicions without sounding openly discriminatory. "It's just, he doesn't seem like our typical business class passenger." "I see," Captain Santos said slowly. "And what does a typical business class passenger look like?" The question exposed the fundamental problem with Jennifer's logic. There was no good answer that wouldn't reveal the discriminatory assumptions underlying her actions. Robert decided to end the charade. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a leather wallet, extracting a business card and a corporate identification badge. "Captain Santos," Robert said, handing over the items. "I think this might clear up the confusion." Captain Santos examined the business card. Robert Hayes, Board of Directors, SkyLine Airways. The corporate ID bore the SkyLine logo and Robert's photograph, along with the designation Board Member. The color drained from Captain Santos's face. She looked at the ID again, then at Robert, then back at the ID. "Mr. Hayes," she said quietly, "I am deeply sorry for this situation." Jennifer, who couldn't see what Captain Santos was holding, stepped closer. "Captain, what's—" Captain Santos turned to face her cabin crew, her expression grim. "Jennifer, Mark, this is Robert Hayes. He's a member of SkyLine's Board of Directors." The words hit Jennifer like a physical blow. Her face went from confused to horrified as the implications sank in. She had just spent 20 minutes questioning, challenging, and attempting to remove a board member from his seat based purely on his appearance. I didn't know," Jennifer stammered. "That's exactly the problem," Robert said, his voice calm but firm. "You didn't know, but you made assumptions anyway. You assumed that someone who looks like me couldn't legitimately belong in business class." Mark looked like he wanted to disappear into the aircraft's floor. "Mr. Hayes, we sincerely apologize. We were just trying to—" "You were trying to maintain standards," Robert finished for him. "I heard that explanation. The question is, whose standards and based on what criteria?" Captain Santos cleared her throat. "Mr. Hayes, on behalf of the entire crew, I want to offer our deepest apologies. This is completely unacceptable behavior, and it will be addressed immediately." "I appreciate that, Captain," Robert replied. "But this isn't about me personally. This is about how your crew treats passengers who don't fit their preconceived notions of who belongs where." Robert stood up and addressed the business class cabin, which had been watching the entire exchange with fascination and discomfort. "Ladies and gentlemen," Robert said, his voice carrying easily through the cabin, "I want you to witness what just happened here. 2 flight attendants spent 20 minutes trying to remove me from a seat I legitimately purchased because they decided I didn't look like I belonged in business class." The cabin was completely silent. Passengers looked uncomfortable, but no one could deny what they had witnessed. Robert continued, "I'm sharing this not to embarrass these crew members, but because this kind of discrimination happens every day to people who don't have corporate IDs to prove their worth. If it can happen to a board member of this airline, imagine what happens to passengers who don't have any recourse." Jennifer was crying now, the full weight of her actions finally hitting her. She had not just violated company policy and basic human decency, she had humiliated herself and potentially damaged SkyLine's reputation in front of a cabin full of witnesses. "Mr. Hayes," Captain Santos said quietly, "what would you like us to do?" Robert considered the question carefully. "Continue with the flight. When we land, I'll be having a conversation with your CEO about implementing immediate changes to customer service training. This crew will participate in that training along with every other SkyLine employee." The flight proceeded in uncomfortable silence. Jennifer and Mark performed their duties mechanically, avoiding eye contact with Robert and speaking only when necessary for safety procedures. Other passengers stole glances at Robert throughout the flight, some nodding respectfully, others looking embarrassed by what they had witnessed. As the plane descended toward Atlanta, Robert reflected on the incident. In 8 years on the board, he had reviewed countless customer satisfaction surveys and discrimination complaints. But experiencing bias firsthand had given him a new perspective on the company's challenges. When the plane landed and passengers began deplaning, several approached Robert to express their support and share their own experiences with airline discrimination. A black businesswoman thanked him for speaking up. An elderly white man apologized for not intervening during the confrontation. Captain Santos waited until most passengers had deplaned before approaching Robert one final time. "Mr. Hayes," she said, "I know this doesn't fix what happened, but I want you to know that I've been flying for 20 years, and I've never been more ashamed of my crew's behavior." Robert nodded. "Captain Santos, this isn't about shame. It's about learning and improving. Use this experience to make sure it never happens again." As Robert walked through the jetway, he was already composing the email he would send to the CEO. SkyLine Airways was about to implement the most comprehensive customer service and anti-discrimination training program in the airline industry. 3 months later, Jennifer Walsh completed her mandatory sensitivity training and was reassigned to ground operations. She never forgot the lesson she learned on Flight 447, that assumptions based on appearance could destroy both careers and human dignity. The incident led to policy changes throughout SkyLine Airways. Every employee now undergoes quarterly training on unconscious bias and cultural sensitivity. The company's customer satisfaction scores, particularly among minority passengers, improved dramatically. And Robert Hayes continued his quarterly incognito flights, but now he traveled with the confidence that SkyLine's crew members understood a fundamental truth. Respect isn't determined by what passengers wear, how much money they appear to have, or what they look like. It's determined by their humanity, because in the end, everyone deserves to reach their destination with dignity intact. Never judge a passenger by their boarding class or a customer by their clothes. In business, as in life, the person you underestimate today might be the one who decides your future tomorrow.